In the last year, we've had Terry Bogard and Mai in Street Fighter 6 and announcements of Ken and Chun-Li in Fatal Fury City of the Wolves as Capcom and SNK fighters clash in the modern day. However, it's Capcom vs SNK 2 that remains the pinnacle of these iconic Japanese powerhouses locking horns in a crossover fighting game. And now, thanks to A-Team, Derek Pascarella and a team of talented artists, translators and programmers, the Dreamcast version of Capcom vs SNK 2 is now fully translated and packed full of extras, making it the best way you can play this classic fighter. What makes it the best way to play? Well, this is Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and I'm here to give you a rundown of this epic translation effort and why it means that the Dreamcast version stands tall above everything else. Like all games featuring Ryu and Co, I will cover Capcom vs SNK 2 in a full retrospective in the future. For now though, here's the basics. Capcom vs SNK 2 was the sequel to the original Capcom vs SNK Millennium Fight 2000. As part of an agreement between the two arcade powerhouses of the 90s, each between Capcom and SNK would produce a crossover fighting game, featuring the other's properties battling against their own. This second Capcom title released in arcades on the Naomi arcade board in August 2001, and it came home to the Japanese market day and date on the 13th of September that year on both the Sega Dreamcast and the Sony PlayStation 2, a release notable for featuring cross-play online matches between the two systems. That same month, the game came to US arcades, with the PlayStation 2 version releasing in the West in November. While 2D fighting games at the time were perceived as archaic, Capcom vs SNK 2 was warmly received, and today is considered to be one of the greatest fighting games of all time. However, Western gamers were shortchanged, so to speak. First off, the PlayStation 2 version operated at half the vertical resolution of the Dreamcast original, though it played exactly the same. Xbox and GameCube versions would follow, but these easy operation versions came with their own issues and balance changes, and so none could really match the Dreamcast original, which itself was not available outside Japan. But there was another problem, which applied to the arcade too. The translation was incomplete. Now, this might sound odd to anyone who has played the English language version of Capcom vs SNK 2 in the West. Everything in the game was in English, right? Well, yes, everything that was in the Western release had been translated. However, the game itself had had content removed and simplified from the Japanese original. Not in a gameplay sense, though on PlayStation 2 we would lament the loss of the online mode, but in terms of the banter between fighters between rounds. You see, in the original Japanese arcade and Dreamcast release, there were 5,100 unique win quotes as fighters commented on who they fought and even had back and forth between team members. Likely a result of the short time between the Japan and Western releases, the downturn of arcades, and the decrease in popularity of 2D fighting games in general. Worth a note that Capcom vs SNK 2 was the last major Capcom fighting game for 7 years, and this meant that the number of translated quotes in the Western version comes out at less than 1,000. Enter Derek Pascarella, aka A-Team, and his crack team of translators, artists and playtesters. Between them, they have updated Capcom vs SNK 2 on the Sega Dreamcast to not only be fully playable in English on the console for the very first time, but is also the first anywhere where the over 5,000 win quotes have been fully translated. As you play through the game, now there's just so much more character interaction. We see dual character dialogue for the first time in the West, as fighters will direct their barbs at each other, sometimes to their defeated foes, and sometimes to their teammates. This is a far cry from the rote and generic dialogue in the original translation. Look, I get why the budget for such a gargantuan translation effort may have been dialed back at the time, but it doesn't make this original version immune to criticism. Thankfully, the enormous efforts from Derek and the team, which has taken 5 translators the best part of a year to complete, has restored this iconic fighting game to its original vision. But it isn't just the post-fight dialogue, but the opening and ending text too, though in those cases that text was borrowed directly from the US PlayStation 2 release, though obviously not without some further cleanups on 18's side, not to mention a number of complete rewrites. Long story short, it's the same as you might remember it, but is also so much better. As Derek said on his social media posts, everything has been translated, and that means move list too. Once again, these have been taken from the PS2 version and then have also seen a lot of corrections and tidy ups. On top of all this translated text is a brand new mode of sorts. The Dreamcast network mode has been replaced with a bonus mode, which lets you view the console release advert from Japan and also read some fascinating interviews from staff who worked on the game, fully translated into English and available here for the first time. Translating 5,100 lines of dialogue, endings, move lists and full-blown interviews is an enormous amount of work, as is the artistic and programming nous required to display all the new text and all the new game modes. But it wasn't just the scale of the task that posed challenges to the team. One of the most interesting developments I saw from watching the progress of this project was how the game manages the Dreamcast 2 video outputs, VGA at 480p, and the other SCART component S-Video and composite connections. It turns out, when correcting the blocking graphic by swapping it for the parrying one, the team made the change and tested it in VGA mode, but when they tested it again with the other outputs, blocking would still appear. It turns out that Capcom vs SNK 2 on Dreamcast accounts for differences in display when outputting the HUD, and even goes as far as having separate references for each graphic. Seeing Derek break this down was fascinating to me, especially concerning the lengths that Capcom went to make the Dreamcast version the best possible experience. And that, ultimately, is where the Dreamcast version of Capcom vs SNK 2 lands. For the longest time it has been considered one of the best ways to play the game, and slight variances in visuals aside, the PS2 version was considered a match in terms of gameplay and input lag. But now, in the world of English speakers at least, the Dreamcast version sits atop its throne, not just because it was arcade perfect by design, or because it's sharper visually than the PS2 version, but because it is now content complete. More than content complete in fact, with the extra mode that has now been added. Even the upcoming Capcom Fighting Collection 2 will be based on the official, neutered original translation, and while it may have its own extras including online play, it is, by the very nature of the version that it is based upon, incomplete. So, you'll be wanting to back up and patch your copy of Capcom vs SNK 2 on the Dreamcast, post haste. Derek, ever the very helpful gentleman, has provided several solutions compatible with various Dreamcast setups and patching programs. So make sure that you give this project the attention that it deserves, because this is a very special translation, and you can support Derek and his stupendous work by visiting his site Dreamcast Forever. But that's all for now. The link in the description is below to allow you to download this patch, and we'd love to hear what you think about this patch and the legendary game itself. If you've enjoyed this video, please give us a like and a subscribe, as that really helps the channel, and if you want to be extra mega, think about becoming a member with a bunch of awesome perks from as little as 99p. I'll be back for more Capcom fighting action, not least in my Street Fighter on Sega series. I've covered the Special Champion Edition and Super Street Fighter 2 ports on the Mega Drive, and in the next video in that series, I'll be covering Street Fighter's Sega Saturn debut. But until then, we will see you on the Sega side.